The dust hung thick in the afternoon air, coating everything in Dry Creek with a fine layer of grit. The town square, if one could call the patch of trampled earth between the general store and the Saluna Square, was more crowded than usual. Men in worn leather chaps and sweat-stained hats gathered in clusters, their voices rising and falling like waves of heat off the parched ground. Women in calico dresses stood at the edges, some with children clutching at their skirts, all drawn by the same grim spectacle. At the center of it all stood Sheriff McKenna, his badge catching the harsh sunlight. Beside him, chained like an animal, was a man whose very presence seemed to command both fear and fascination from the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered, with skin bronzed by sun and heritage. He stood with a dignity that no amount of iron could diminish. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, and though his wrists were bound with rusted shackles that had carved raw grooves into his flesh, he held his head high. "Step right up, folks," the sheriff called out, his voice carrying the authority of law and the showmanship of a carnival barker. "Got ourselves a genuine wild one here. Caught him stealing horses from the Matt Ranch. Judge says he's to be sold to cover the damages." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. "Savage," someone spat. "Beast," another added. The words flew like stones, but the man in chains never flinched. His dark eyes swept over the crowd with a calm that seemed to unsettle them more than any show of rage would have. $50 to start," McKenna announced. "Who'll give me 50 for this strong back? Put him to work in the mines or breaking horses. Lord knows these savages are good with animals." From the back of the crowd, a voice rose clear and sharp as a rifle crack. The town of Dry Creek gathered to jeer at the savage for sale, a man in chains whose quiet dignity only fueled their scorn. At the edge of town, the widow Clara Whitford fought a losing battle to save her own failing ranch. She had nothing left to spare yet. When she saw the man on the auction block, she walked through the mocking crowd holding out her life savings. "Call him savage if you want," she declared, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she had. "I see a man worth saving." For the first time, something flickered in the prisoner's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or something deeper that had been buried beneath years of harsh treatment. McKenna looked uncomfortable now, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Mrs. Whitford, I got a responsibility to this town." "You have a responsibility to the law," Clara interrupted. "The judge said he was to be sold. I'm buying unless you're telling me my money's no good because I'm a woman." That struck a nerve. The sheriff's face reened, but he couldn't argue with her logic. In a town where law was still finding its footing, even he couldn't openly discriminate against a widow's legal tender. "Fine," he growled, snatching the bundle from her hand. He counted the coins with exaggerated care, clearly hoping to find her short. When the count came up true, his scowl deepened. "Bill of sale will be at my office. You can collect it and him in an hour." Clara nodded curtly. "I'll take him now. Now see here. I've paid for him. He's my property now. As you so crudely put it, I'll take him now. Or you can explain to Judge Harrison why you held on to him after the sale was complete." The threat of involving the circuit judge, who was known for his strict adherence to the letter of the law, made McKenna's protest die in his throat. With visible reluctance, he produced a key and unlocked the shackles around the man's ankles, though he left the wrist restraints in place. "The rest come off when I get the bill of sale," Clara said firmly. She turned to the man and, in a voice gentler than any he'd likely heard in months, said, "Come with me." The man studied her for a long moment as if trying to solve a puzzle, then, with a dignity that made the crowd's earlier jeers seem even more shameful, he inclined his head slightly and stepped forward. As Clara Ara led him through the crowd, the townspeople parted like the Red Sea, but their faces showed none of Moses's reverence. Disgust, shock, and moral outrage painted their features in broad strokes. "You'll regret this, Clara," Mrs. Patterson called after them. "Mark my words." Clara didn't turn around. "The only thing I'd regret," she said loud enough for all to hear, is standing by while you all treat a human being like livestock." Old Samuel Turner, the blacksmith, shook his grizzled head. "That woman's going to get herself killed," he muttered. "Them savages can't be civilized. It's not in their nature." But young Tom Bradley, the doctor's son, watched the pair disappear down the dusty street with thoughtful eyes. Maybe he said quietly, "It's our nature that needs civilizing." His father cuffed him sharply on the ear. "Don't let me hear such talk from you again, boy. That kind of thinking will see you run out of town or worse." As Clara and the man walked toward the sheriff's office, she could feel the weight of the town's judgment pressing down on her shoulders like a yoke. But she'd borne heavier burdens: the loss of her husband, the struggle to keep the ranch afloat, the pitying looks that had followed her for 3 years. All of it had prepared her for this moment. She glanced sideways at the man walking beside her, despite the chains. He moved with a fluid grace that spoke of strength held in check. His face, now that she could see it clearly, was weathered, but not old, marked by hardship, but not broken by it. "I'm Clara," she said softly, not expecting a response. He looked at her, then really looked at her, and she saw intelligence in those dark eyes, along with a weariness born of hard experience. They reached the sheriff's office, a squat building that served as both jail and administrative center. Clara pushed open the door, the man following silently. McKenna was already there, scratching out the bill of sale with obvious reluctance. "You sure about this, Mrs. Whitford?" he asked one last time. "It ain't too late to change your mind. I could find another buyer, maybe someone better equipped to handle. Just write the bill, Sheriff." McKenna sighed and completed the document, stamping it with more force than necessary. "There may the Lord help you, because you surely ain't helping yourself." Clara took the paper and folded it carefully. The keys, Sheriff, with a disgusted snort. McKenna tossed her the key to the wrist shackles. "Don't come crying to me when he slits your throat in your sleep." Clara's eyes flashed dangerously. The only throat that's been cut in this town lately was by Bob Harmon when he was drunk, and he's as white as fresh cotton. "Good day, Sheriff." She turned and walked out, her purchased man following. Once outside, she stopped and faced him. "I'm going to unlock these now," she said, holding up the key. "I don't expect you'll run. Where would you go? But I won't keep you in chains like an animal." She reached for his wrists, and he held them out slowly, watching her with those unreadable eyes. The key turned with a rusty protest, and the shackles fell away, hitting the wooden walkway with a dull clang that seemed to echo down the empty street. The man rubbed his raw wrists, the first truly human gesture she'd seen from him. Red welts and scabs marked where the iron had bitten deep. "We'll need to tend to those," Clara said. "I have salve at the ranch." She paused, then added, "It's about an hour's ride. Can you ride?" The ghost of something, almost a smile, touched his lips. He nodded once. "Good. The livery stable's this way." As they walked through town toward the stable, Clara held her head high, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed in their wake. She'd crossed a line today. She knew there would be no going back to being just the widow Whitford object of pity and casual charity. Now she was something else, something dangerous in their eyes. But as she glanced at the man walking beside her, his stride matching hers, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 long years. Purpose. Maybe she couldn't save her husband from the fever that took him. Maybe she couldn't save her ranch from slowly failing. But this man, this human being whom everyone else had written off as a savage, maybe him she could save, and maybe, though she didn't dare think it yet, he might save her too. The ranch appeared as they crested the final hill, and Clara felt the familiar tightness in her chest. Even in the golden light of late afternoon, there was no hiding what the Whitford place had become. The main house listed slightly to the east, its unpainted boards weathered to the color of old bones. Half the fence posts along the front pasture had given up their fight with gravity, leaving gaps wide enough for cattle to wander through if she'd had any cattle left to wander. She glanced at the man riding beside her on the old mare she'd borrowed from the livery. He surveyed the property with those dark, calculating eyes, taking in every broken board and weed-choked garden bed. Clara waited for the judgment she was sure would come, but he simply nodded as if he'd seen worse. It wasn't always like this, she heard herself saying, then immediately wished she hadn't. What did it matter what he thought? They dismounted near the barn, or what remained of it. The structure stood but barely, its roof patched with mismatched shingles and tar paper. Clara led the mare inside, grateful that at least this duty she could still perform properly. The man followed and, without being asked, began removing the borrowed saddle from his mount. Inside the house, Clara lit the oil lamp against the gathering dusk. The yellow light revealed a space that was clean but sparse. A table with 2 chairs, a wood stove shelves holding a meager collection of dishes and preserves. On the mantel above the cold fireplace sat a single photograph in a tarnished frame. "You can sleep in the barn," she said, not meeting his eyes. "There's fresh hay in the loft and blankets in the trunk by the door. I'll bring supper out when it's ready." She busied herself at the stove, aware of him standing motionless by the door. When she finally turned, he was looking at the photograph. Jacob stared back from the frame, frozen forever at 28, his smile confident, and his eyes full of plans that would never be realized. "My husband," Clara said quietly. "Jacob? He died 3 winters ago." The man nodded slowly, then moved toward the door. Just before he left, he paused and looked back at her. His lips moved carefully as if remembering how to form the words. "Thank you," he said, his voice deep and rusty from disuse. Then he was gone, leaving Clara standing alone in her kitchen, one hand pressed to her chest where her heart hammered against her ribs. Supper was simple beans and cornbread with the last of the preserved peaches from 2 summers ago. She carried the tray to the barn, finding him sitting on a bale of hay, working something in his hands. As she drew closer, she saw it was a piece of harness, and he was mending a broken buckle with surprising dexterity. "You don't have to," she began, but he looked up at her with something almost like amusement in his eyes. She set the tray down beside him. "Well, I suppose there's plenty needs fixing around here?" They ate in companionable silence, the barn cats emerging from their hiding spots to investigate the stranger. One brave tabby even rubbed against his leg, and Clara saw his hand drop to stroke its head with unexpected gentleness. That night she lay awake listening to the familiar creaks and groans of the old house. But underneath those sounds was something new. The knowledge that she wasn't alone on the ranch for the first time in 3 years. It should have frightened her, she supposed. Everyone in town certainly expected her to be frightened. Instead, she felt something she couldn't quite name. Not peace exactly, but perhaps the possibility of it. Morning came with a list of necessities. Clara stood in her kitchen, pencil in hand, trying to prioritize repairs that all seemed equally urgent. The roof leaked in 3 places. The well pump needed new leather washers. The chicken coop had a hole that let in foxes. The garden fence couldn't keep out rabbits. And underlying it all was the constant need for money she didn't have. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. The man stood on her porch, his hair tied back, wearing the same clothes from yesterday, but somehow looking more settled. He gestured toward the barn, then at himself, then made a motion like swinging a hammer. "You want to work?" Clara asked. He nodded. "I can't pay you. You understand that, don't you? I spent everything I had just to." She stopped, heat rising in her cheeks. "I mean food and shelter. That's all I can offer." He held up his hands, showing her the welts from the shackles, now clean but still angry-looking. Then he pointed to the house to her and nodded again. The message was clear. She had freed him. That was payment enough. Clara found herself blinking back sudden tears. Well then, I suppose we'd better get started. She showed him the tool shed, Jacob's tools still hanging in their places gathering dust and rust. He examined each one carefully, testing edges and joints, setting aside those that needed repair. When he found Jacob's wet stone, he looked at her questioningly. Yes, of course, whatever you need to use. The words came out choked. By midday, the rhythmic sound of hammer on wood filled the air. Clara went about her own chores, feeding the chickens, tending the vegetable garden, but her attention kept drifting to where he worked. He'd started with the fence, and already a section that had been leaning drunkenly was standing straight and true. When she brought him water, he drank deeply, then surprised her by speaking again. "Good tools," he said, nodding toward the shed. "Your man knew iron." Jacob was particular about his tools. Clara managed, said a man was only as good as what he worked with. The stranger considered this, then nodded approvingly. Wise. That evening, as they ate another simple meal this time at the kitchen table, Clara having insisted, she found herself talking about Jacob, about the ranch, about her family back east, who'd written her off when she'd refused to return after the funeral. They couldn't understand, she said, pushing beans around her plate. This was our dream, Jacob's and mine. We were going to raise horses, maybe some cattle, build something that would last. She laughed bitterly. Instead, I've watched it fall apart piece by piece. The bank owns more of it than I do now. The man listened without comment, but his attention never wavered. When she finally ran out of words, he stood and moved to the window looking out at the darkening land. After a long moment, he spoke. "Land remembers," he said slowly. "Bad times, good times, but land waits. For hands that know, for hearts that stay." Clara stared at him. It was the longest speech she'd heard from him, and the wisdom in it made her throat tight. Days turned into a week. Then, too, a routine emerged. He would work from sunrise to sunset, fixing, mending, rebuilding. She would keep house, tend the garden, and gradually, tentatively begin to plan beyond the next meal. In the evenings, they would eat together, and sometimes he would speak never much, but each word seemed carefully chosen and worth the silence that surrounded it. She learned his name the day he fixed the well pump. As clear water gushed forth for the first time in months, he smiled a real smile that transformed his weathered face. "Samuel," he said, pointing to himself. "Samuel Tallbear." "Samuel," she repeated, and his smile widened at hearing his name spoken kindly. The town, of course, watched and whispered. When Clara went to Bradley's store for supplies, conversation stopped mid-sentence. Women she'd known for years crossed the street to avoid her. Only young Tom Bradley would meet her eyes, and he always added an extra apple or two to her purchases when his father wasn't looking. "They're saying things." Tom warned her one day, glancing around nervously. "Ugly things about you and him." Clara's chin lifted. "Let them say what they will. I know the truth. Just be careful. Mrs. Whitford, some of the men they're talking about riding out to your place, making sure you're safe." The implications in that pause made Clara's blood run cold, but she kept her voice steady. "You tell those men that I'm safer now than I've been in 3 years, and if they set foot on my property without invitation, they'll be met with Jacob's shotgun." But that night she did retrieve the shotgun from its place above the mantel, cleaning and loading it with hands that trembled only slightly. When Samuel saw it leaning by the door the next morning, he nodded grimly. He understood the danger she'd put herself in by taking him in. That day he worked closer to the house, and she noticed he'd taken to wearing a hammer on his belt, even when he wasn't using it. The first test came sooner than expected. Clara was in the garden when she heard horses approaching 3, maybe 4 riders. Her hands tightened on the hoe, but she forced herself to keep working, not looking up even when the horses stopped at her gate. Clara Whitford. The voice belonged to Dale Morrison, owner of the largest ranch in the valley, and a man who'd made no secret of his interest in acquiring her land. "We've come to check on your welfare." Clara straightened slowly, taking in the men array before her. Morrison, of course, with his cold eyes and expensive hat beside him. The Harmon brothers, mean drunks, both of them, and Sheriff McKenna looking uncomfortable, but present nonetheless. "As you can see, Mr. Morrison, I'm perfectly well." She kept her voice level, though her heart raced. Now Clara Morrison dismounted, his hand resting casually on his pistol. "You can't blame folks for being concerned. A woman alone with a savage. His name is Samuel." The words came out sharp as shattered glass. "And I'm not alone, as you've just pointed out." Morrison's face darkened. "You've taken leave of your senses, woman. But I'm prepared to help. I'll take that creature off your hands, and I'll give you a fair price for this land. You could go back east. Start fresh. My land is not for sale. Everything's for sale. Clara, it's just a matter of price. Get off my property." Clara's voice was quiet now. Dangerous. Morrison took a step forward, and suddenly Samuel was there, materialized from wherever he'd been working. He said nothing, just stood slightly behind and to the side of Clara, the hammer in his hand catching the sunlight. The Harmon brothers reached for their guns, but McKenna barked, "Hold!" The sheriff looked between Clara and Samuel, something shifting in his expression. "The ladies asked you to leave Morrison. I suggest we do that." Morrison's face flushed red. "You're taking her side with that?" "I'm taking the law's side," McKenna interrupted. "And the law says a person's got a right to their own property. Come on now." It took another long moment. But finally, Morrison remounted. "This isn't over," he told Clara. "When that savage shows his true nature, and he don't expect help from decent folks." They rode away in a cloud of dust and threats, leaving Clara and Samuel standing in the garden. Her legs felt weak suddenly, and she might have fallen if he hadn't steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow. "Thank you," she whispered. He shook his head. "You stand for me," he said simply. "I stand for you." That night, Clara couldn't bring herself to send him back to the barn. "There's a room," she said hesitantly. "Off the kitchen. It was meant for. Well, it's empty. You'd be closer if she trailed off flustered." Samuel understood. That night, for the first time since Jacob died, Clara slept, knowing someone else was under her roof, someone who would stand between her and whatever darkness might come calling. And in his small room, Samuel Tallbear lay awake listening to the night sounds of this strange new place that was beginning to feel less strange. He thought of the woman who'd looked at him and seen a man worth saving, and made a silent vow that her faith would not be misplaced. The journey from town had been silent save for the creak of leather and the steady clop of hooves on hard-packed earth. Clara stole glances at the man riding beside her, trying to read anything in his stoic expression. Samuel Tallbear sat the borrowed mare as if born to it, his back straight, despite the ordeal he'd endured, his dark eyes scanning the horizon with the watchfulness of someone who had learned that danger could come from any direction. As they descended into a shallow valley, Clara noticed how he shifted slightly in the saddle, favoring his left side. The movement was subtle, but she'd learned to read such signs in the years of nursing Jacob through various injuries that came with ranch work. "We'll stop at the creek," she said, pointing to a line of cottonwoods ahead. "Let the horses drink." He nodded, and she thought she saw relief flicker across his features. At the creek, Clara watched him dismount carefully, each movement deliberate and controlled. When he knelt by the water's edge, she expected him to use the tin cup tied to his saddle. Instead, he cupped the clear water in both palms, lifting it to his lips with a reverence that made her breath catch. The simple act held a ceremonial quality, as if he were greeting the land itself. Water dripped from his fingers as he drank deeply, and when he finally looked up, he found her watching. Their eyes met across the small distance, and Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "The water's good here," she said unnecessarily, fed by mountain snow. He nodded slowly, then surprised her by speaking. "Water knows," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Clean heart, clean water." It was the first time she'd heard him speak, beyond the simple thank you at her house. His English was accented, but clear, each word carefully chosen. "You speak English well," Clara observed, settling herself on a fallen log. A shadow crossed his face. "Mission school," he said shortly, then added with bitter irony, "They say make us civilized." The pain in those words made Clara's chest tight. She wanted to say something comforting, but realized how hollow any such words would be. Instead, she asked, "What should I call you? I mean," she gestured helplessly, "I don't even know your name." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then Samuel. "They give me Samuel at Mission." "But my people?" He touched his chest. "Tallbear." "Samuel Tallbear," Clara repeated softly. The name felt right on her tongue, substantial and dignified. He studied her with those penetrating eyes. "You are not afraid?" It wasn't a question, but Clara considered it anyway. "Should I be others' fear?" "Always fear." He gestured toward town. "They see Savage." "You see," he paused, searching for words. "You see man." "Yes," Clara said simply. "I see a man." Something shifted in his expression, then a softening around the eyes that made him look younger, more vulnerable. He turned back to the creek, and she saw him us as he shifted position. "You're hurt," she said. It wasn't a question. He shrugged, a gesture that clearly cost him. "Let me see." For a moment she thought he would refuse. Then slowly he pulled aside his torn shirt. Clara bit back a gasp. His ribs were mottled with bruises, purple and yellow and green, and there were older scars crisscrossing his back like a map of past cruelties. "Who did this?" she asked, though she could guess. The good citizens of Dry Creek weren't known for their gentle handling of prisoners. "Does not matter," he said, pulling his shirt back into place. "Is done it matters to me," Clara said fiercely. He looked at her then with something like wonder. "Strange woman," he murmured. "Buy man like horse, worry for his pain." "I didn't buy a man," Clara corrected firmly. "I bought your freedom. There's a difference." They mounted up again and continued toward the ranch. As they rode, Clara found herself talking about the land, the weather, anything to fill the silence that seemed weighted with too many unspoken things. "That ridge there marks the western boundary," she said, pointing. "Or it used to. I had to sell that section last year to pay taxes, and that grove of oaks, that's where Jacob proposed to me." He said, her voice caught. "He said we'd build our house where we could see those trees from the kitchen window." Samuel listened without comment, but she could feel his attention like a physical thing. It had been so long since anyone had really listened to her. As they crested the final hill and the ranch came into view, Clara felt the familiar mixture of pride and shame. In the afternoon light, every flaw was visible. The sagging fence lines, the barn's patched roof, the garden overrun with weeds. "It's not much," she said defensively, "and it needs work, more work than one person can manage." Samuel surveyed the property with those sharp eyes, taking in every detail. Then he nodded once decisively. "Good bones," he said. "Land wants to live, just needs." He made a gesture with his hands, a flowering motion. "Care," Clara suggested. "Yes, care." They rode down to the house in companionable silence. As they approached the front gate, or what remained of it, Samuel suddenly tensed. His hand moved instinctively to his side, where a weapon might have hung. "What is it?" Clara asked, alarmed. He pointed to tracks in the dust. "3 horses recent, maybe 1 hour." Clara's heart sank. "Visitors," she said grimly. "I can guess who." Sure enough, as they rounded the barn, 3 horses stood tethered to the porch rail. Their riders lounged on her front steps like they owned the place. Clara recognized them immediately. Dale Morrison and 2 of his hands. "Afternoon," Clara Morrison said, standing with false courtesy. He was a big man, prosperous and powerful, with cold gray eyes that had always made her uncomfortable. We were starting to worry. "You've been gone a long time." "Not long enough, apparently," Clara muttered under her breath. Louder. She said, "Mr. Morrison, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Morrison's eyes fixed on Samuel, and his expression hardened. "Heard about your purchase in town. Came to make sure you hadn't lost your mind entirely. My mind is perfectly sound. Thank you." Is it Morrison stepped off the porch, his hand resting casually on his gun belt, because only a woman who'd taken leave of her senses would bring a savage onto her property. Samuel had dismounted and stood perfectly still, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the readiness in his stance. "His name is Samuel," Clara said coldly, "and he's here to help with the ranch work. Unless you're offering to fix my fences and mend my roof, I'll thank you to mind your own business." Morrison's face flushed. "Now see here, Clara, I've been patient with you. Offered to buy this place at a fair price more than once. But if you're going to endanger yourself and the whole community with your foolishness—" "The only danger here," Clara interrupted, "is from uninvited guests who seem to think they have a say in how I run my property." One of Morrison's men snickered. "Ain't natural. A white woman taking up with a savage. People are talking, ma'am, saying things that ain't fit for Christian ears." Clara's temper finally snapped. Then perhaps they should spend less time gossiping and more time reading their Bibles, particularly the parts about loving thy neighbor, and judge not lest ye be judged. Morrison stepped closer, and suddenly Samuel was there, placing himself between Clara and the bigger man. He said nothing, but his presence spoke volumes. "You threatening me, boy?" Morrison snarled. Samuel remained silent, but he didn't back down. "That's enough." Clara moved around Samuel to face Morrison directly. "You need to leave now. This ain't over," Morrison warned. "When that savage shows his true nature, and he will, you'll come begging for help. And maybe I'll give it if you're willing to be reasonable about selling. Get off my land." Morrison and his men mounted up, but before riding off, he turned back. "You're making a mistake. Clara, a dangerous one. Don't say you weren't warned." After they'd gone, Clara found herself shaking. Samuel guided her to the porch steps and gently pressed her to sit. Then he went to the well, drew fresh water, and brought her a cup. "Thank you," she managed, wrapping her hands around the tin cup to still their trembling. He crouched before her, his dark eyes concerned. "This because of me I go. Trouble goes, no." The word came out sharper than she intended. "No," she repeated more softly. "The trouble was here long before you. Morrison's been circling like a vulture ever since Jacob died. You're just his latest excuse." Samuel considered this, then asked, "Why you do this by freedom for stranger?" Clara looked down at her hands, trying to find words for something she didn't fully understand herself. "When I saw you there in chains being sold like property, I thought about how Jacob died. He was sick for 3 days. Fever. Nothing I could do but watch him fade away. I couldn't save him." She met Samuel's eyes. "But I could save you. Does that make sense?" "Yes," he said simply, as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Clara stood. "Come on, let me show you where you'll sleep, and then we'll see about some supper." And Samuel, she waited until he looked at her. "Tomorrow, we start fixing this place up together." He nodded. And for the first time since she'd seen him in chains, something that might have been hope flickered in his eyes. That evening, as Clara prepared a simple meal and Samuel tended to the horses, she realized the ranch didn't feel quite so empty anymore. The shadows seemed less threatening, the silence less oppressive. It was a small change, but after 3 years of grieving, even small changes felt momentous. At her kitchen table, She watched him eat with careful precision, noticed how he savored each bite as if remembering leaner times. When their eyes met across the table, he inclined his head slightly, a gesture of gratitude that needed no words. "We'll go to town tomorrow for supplies." Clara said, "I'll need to make a list. Tools, mainly nails, maybe some lumber," if she trailed off, remembering her empty purse. Samuel reached into his pocket and placed something on the table. It was a small leather pouch. And when Clara opened it, she found several silver coins. "Where did you before jail?" He said, "Hidden. They not find. I can't take your money." He pushed the pouch toward her. "For ranch, for us." Us. The simple word lodged in Clara's chest like a warm ember. She nodded, not trusting her voice. That night, as she prepared for bed, Clara paused at her window. In the barn, a soft light glowed. Samuel had lit the lantern she'd left for him. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't alone on the ranch. For the first time in 3 years, tomorrow felt like something to look forward to, rather than simply endure. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch as Clara emerged from the house, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She found Samuel already at work splitting wood behind the barn with smooth, efficient strokes. His shirt hung on a nearby post, and she could see the muscles in his back working beneath bronze skin still marked by fading bruises. "You're up early," she said, offering him one of the cups. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher, painting the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. "Today we fix fence," Samuel asked, gesturing toward the pasture, where several posts leaned at dangerous angles. "That would be good," Clara agreed. "Though I should warn you, I'm not much help with the heavy work. Jacob always," she trailed off, as she often did when memories ambushed her. Samuel studied her thoughtfully. "You know other things garden chicken's house." He gestured around them. "Takes 2 kinds of strength." It was more words than he usually strung together, and Clara found herself blinking back unexpected tears at his understanding. They worked side by side through the morning, Samuel digging post holes while Clara held the new posts steady. She was surprised to find that they fell into an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's needs without much talk. When the sun climbed high and the heat became oppressive, they took shelter in the shade of the barn. Clara had brought water and some cold biscuits from breakfast. As they ate, she watched a hawk circling lazily overhead. My father would have liked this land. Samuel said suddenly he say land that grows sage, and cedar has strong spirit. Is he still living? Clara asked carefully. Samuel's face closed off slightly. Gone many winters now. Soldiers came to our village, said we must move. Father said no. The land was sacred where our ancestors lay. He was quiet for a long moment. Soldiers not like no. Clara reached out instinctively, her hand covering his where it rested on his knee. I'm sorry. He looked down at her pale hand on his darker one. Something unreadable in his expression. You have soft heart, he said quietly. Dangerous in hard world, perhaps, Clara admitted. But I'd rather have a soft heart than a hard one. They returned to work, and by late afternoon, a good section of fence stood straight and strong. Clara couldn't help but feel a surge of pride as she surveyed their progress. It had been so long since anything on the ranch had improved rather than deteriorated. As they gathered the tools, Samuel suddenly stiffened his head. Turning toward the road, Clara followed his gaze and saw a rider approaching young Tom Bradley from town. Mrs. Whitford, Tom called out as he drew near. I've got something for you. He dismounted, glancing nervously at Samuel, but managed a polite nod. Clara appreciated the gesture. It was more courtesy than most in town would show. What is it, Tom? The young man pulled a letter from his jacket. This came on the stage yesterday. My PA said to bring it out to you. He hesitated, then added in a lower voice. There's talk in town, ma'am. Morrison's been stirring folks up saying, You're well saying things that ain't true. Some of the men are getting worked up about it. Clara's jaw tightened. Let them talk. Just be careful is all. Tom mounted up again, tipping his hat. Good day to you, ma'am, sir. After he'd gone, Clara looked at the letter with trepidation. The return address was from Chicago. Her sister Margaret, with trembling fingers. She opened it and read, Dearest Clara, word has reached us of your recent actions. I cannot express how shocked and dismayed we are to hear that you have taken a savage into your home. Have you completely lost your senses? Mother is beside herself with worry. I implore you to reconsider this madness, sell the ranch, and come home where you belong. You cannot continue this unnatural existence, playing at being a man and now consorting with heathens. Think of Jacob's memory. If nothing else, what would he say? Your loving sister. Margaret Clara crumpled the letter in her fist, her chest heaving with suppressed anger. Samuel watched her quietly, not asking, but clearly concerned. My sister, she said bitterly. Apparently news travels fast. She thinks I should sell the ranch and return to Chicago where I can be a proper widow wearing black and pouring tea for the rest of my days. You want this? No. The word exploded from her. This is my home. Jacob and I built this life together, and I won't abandon it just because she gestured helplessly. Because it's hard. Because I'm alone. Because people disapprove of my choices. Not alone now, Samuel said quietly. Clara looked at him standing there with dirt on his hands from their shared labor sweat on his brow, from working her land, and felt something shift inside her chest. No, she agreed softly. Not alone. That evening, as they ate supper, Clara found herself talking about Jacob not with the usual weight of grief, but with something closer to fondness. He was terrible with chickens, she said, smiling at the memory. They'd scatter every time he came near the coop. He'd curse and stomp around, which only made it worse. But horses he could gentle the wildest horse with just his voice and hands. Samuel listened, occasionally asking a question that showed he was paying attention. When Clara asked about his own life before he spoke haltingly of learning to track with his grandfather of ceremonies by firelight of a world that seemed to grow smaller each year as more settlers arrived. Your English, Clara said. You speak it well, but you said the mission school. His face darkened. 3 years at mission, they take us from families cut hair, forbid our language, beat us if we speak it. He touched his chest. They try to kill the Indian, save the man, but cannot kill what lives here. Good, Clara said fiercely. Don't let them. As the days passed, they fell into a routine. Morning coffee as the sun rose, worked through the heat of the day, Samuel handling the heavy labor while Claire attended the garden and animals. Evenings spent in quiet companionship, sometimes talking often, just sitting in comfortable silence. The change in the ranch was remarkable. Fences stood straight. The barn door no longer hung crooked. The garden, freed from weeds and properly watered, began to show signs of life. Even the chickens seemed more productive, as if responding to the renewed energy of the place. One afternoon, as Clara worked in the garden, she heard Samuel's voice from the barn singing. She realized with surprise the words were in his own language, the melody, unlike anything she'd ever heard. She stood, transfixed, trowel forgotten in her hand, as the haunting sound washed over her. When the song ended, she found him watching her from the barn door. That was beautiful, she said. What was it? Song for the horses, he said, seeming almost embarrassed. My grandfather's song makes them calm. Would you teach me? He looked surprised. You want to learn? Yes. So began Clara's lessons in Samuel's language, simple words at first. Water, sky, earth. He was a patient teacher, correcting her pronunciation with a gentle humor. In return, she helped him with reading, having discovered he could speak English far better than he could read it. One evening, 2 weeks after Samuel's arrival, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The ranch looked better than it had in years, and Clara felt a contentment she'd thought lost forever. Thank you, she said suddenly. Samuel looked at her questioningly. For staying, for working, for... She gestured at the improved ranch. All of this, I couldn't have done it alone. You give me freedom, he said simply. I give you my hands, my strength. Fair trade. Is that all it is? A trade? He was quiet for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. No, not just trade. He seemed to struggle for words. You see me as man, not savage, not less than just man. This is gift greater than freedom. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Without thinking, she reached over and took his hand. His fingers, calloused from work, closed gently around hers. They sat that way as the stars emerged. Two people who had found in each other something they hadn't known they were looking for. The world beyond the ranch might disapprove, might threaten, might condemn. But here in this moment, they had created something precious. A partnership built on mutual respect, shared labor, and the gradual blossoming of trust. When Clara finally went inside, she paused at her bedroom window to look out at the barn. The soft glow of Samuel's lantern was visible through the cracks in the wood. Tomorrow would bring more work and likely more challenges from those who couldn't understand what they were building together. But tonight, Clara felt hope. For the first time since Jacob's death, the ranch felt like home again. And for the first time in his life, Samuel Tallbear was discovering what it meant to be seen, not as a savage to be feared or a problem to be solved, but simply as a man, one worthy of respect, kindness, and perhaps something more. The sound of approaching horses woke Clara from uneasy sleep. She'd been dreading this moment for days, ever since Tom Bradley's warning. Through her window, she could see torches flickering in the pre-dawn darkness. 5, maybe 6 riders making their way up the path to her house. She dressed quickly, hands steady, despite her racing heart. Jacob's shotgun stood ready by the door where she'd placed it each night since Samuel's arrival. As she reached for it, she heard movement from the small room off the kitchen. Samuel emerged fully dressed, his face grave. "Stay inside," Clara said firmly. "This is my fight." "No." His voice broke no argument. "We stand together." Before she could protest, the riders were in her yard. Clara recognized them even in the dim light. The Harmon brothers, Jim and Pete, both known for their drinking and quick tempers. Dale Morrison's foreman, Ray Hutchkins. 2 others she didn't know well, rough men who worked the cattle drives, and at their head not Morrison himself, but Reverend Blackwood from the church in town. Mrs. Whitford the Reverend called out his voice, carrying that particular brand of righteousness that had always set Clara's teeth on edge. "We've come to talk sense to you." Clara stepped onto the porch shotgun, visible but not raised. Samuel followed, standing slightly behind her left shoulder. "Strange hour for a social call," Reverend Clara said coolly. "Desperate times call for desperate measures." Blackwood dismounted his black coat, making him look like a crow in the torchlight. "This situation has gone on long enough. You're living in sin with a heathen, bringing shame upon yourself and danger to our community." "I'm doing nothing of the sort," Clara replied. "Mr. Tallbear works for me. He sleeps in the barn. We've broken no laws." Jim Harmon spat tobacco juice near her porch steps. "Don't matter where he sleeps. Ain't natural. A white woman taking up with a savage. Watch your mouth on my property," Clara warned. Or what Pete Harmon sneered. "You'll have your pet Indian scalp us." Samuel stepped forward then, and even in the flickering torchlight, there was something in his bearing that made the men shift nervously in their saddles. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His presence alone was a statement. "See," Blackwood pointed dramatically. "He threatens good Christian men. This is what comes of defying God's natural order. The only threat here," Clara said, her voice cutting through the night air, "is from men who ride to a woman's home in darkness carrying torches like a lynch mob." "Now see here," Hutchkins began. But Clara wasn't finished. "No, you see here. I've broken no laws. I've harmed no one. I've taken a man who was being sold like cattle and given him honest work for honest wages. If that offends you, then perhaps you should examine your own hearts, rather than riding about the countryside in the middle of the night like common thugs. You've lost your way, Blackwood said, his voice taking on the cadence of a sermon. First, you refused to return to your family after your husband's death, insisting on living alone like a man. Now this abomination, but it's not too late. Send this creature away. Return to town where the good women of the church can guide you back to righteousness. Clara laughed a bitter sound that made several horses dance nervously. Guide me. The same women who cross the street to avoid me, who whisper behind their hands when I buy supplies. No, thank you, Reverend. I'll take my chances with the company I keep. Then you're making your choice. Hutchkins growled. Don't expect help when things go bad. And they will go bad. These savages can't be trusted. One day you'll wake up with your throat. Enough. Clara raised the shotgun, not aiming at anyone but making her intent clear. You've said your piece. Now get off my land. This ain't over, Jim Harmon warned. Morrison's got plans for this place, and he won't let some Indian lover stand in his way. Morrison can go to hell, Clara said evenly. And so can the rest of you, if you can't see a man's worth beyond the color of his skin. Blackwood mounted his horse with offended dignity. I'll pray for your soul, Mrs. Whitford. You'll need it. Save your prayers for someone who wants them, Clara replied. The men rode off, but not before Pete Harmon threw his torch toward the barn. Samuel moved faster than Clara had ever seen him move, stamping out the flame before it could catch the dry wood. As the sound of hooves faded into the distance, Clara found herself shaking. The shotgun suddenly felt impossibly heavy, and she set it aside with trembling hands. You spoke well, Samuel said quietly. Strong words, true words. Fat lot of good it did, Clara said bitterly. They'll be back or others like them. Yes, Samuel agreed, but not tonight. They stood together on the porch as dawn broke properly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The morning felt fragile, as if the night's ugliness might shatter it. I'm sorry, Clara said suddenly. You shouldn't have to face this. The hatred, the threats, it's not fair. Samuel turned to look at her, his dark eyes unreadable in the growing light. Fair. He shook his head. Life not about fair. You think fair when you buy my freedom, when you stand between me and guns. No, you do what is right. This is more than fair. Clara felt tears threatening. They could hurt you, kill you because of me. Because you see man where others see savage. Samuel finished. I choose this. Choose to stay. Not for work, not for shelter. For he paused, seeming to search for words. For a woman who stands with shotgun against 6 men, who speaks truth to lies, who gives dignity to one who had none. The tears came then, and Clara didn't try to stop them. Samuel stood quietly beside her, not touching, but somehow offering comfort through his steady presence. We should eat, Clara finally said, wiping her eyes. Then check the fences. They might have cut them out of spite. Samuel nodded, but before they could go inside, he spoke again. Clara. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her heart skip. Thank you for standing, for speaking, for seeing. She met his eyes, seeing in them a warmth that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with something deeper, something that frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. We stand together, she said, echoing his earlier words. Yes, he agreed. Together. The day passed quietly, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling of impending storm. They found no damage to the fences, but she noticed Samuel staying closer to the house than usual, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. That evening, as they sat down to supper, Clara made a decision. She went to her room and returned with something wrapped in oilcloth. This was Jacob's, she said, placing the bundle on the table. Inside was a Colt revolver, well-maintained despite 3 years of disuse. I want you to have it. Samuel stared at the weapon, then at her. You trust me with this, I trust you with my life, Clara said simply. You've already proven worthy of that trust. He picked up the revolver, carefully checking its action with practiced ease. I will not dishonor this gift, he said solemnly. I know you won't. They were interrupted by the sound of a wagon approaching. Clara tensed, but Samuel, peering out the window, relaxed. One wagon old man driving, woman beside him. Clara looked and felt a wave of relief. It's the Olsons, Lars and Ingrid. They have the farm 2 mi north. The elderly couple pulled up to the house and Clara went out to greet them, Samuel following at a distance. Mrs. Whitford Lars said in his thick Norwegian accent, "We hear there was trouble this morning." "News travels fast," Clara said wearily. Ingrid climbed down from the wagon with surprising agility for her age. "That Blackwood," she said with disgust. "Man of God, Pa God does not ride with torches in the night. We bring supplies," Lars said, gesturing to the wagon bed. "Flour, salt, pork, some preserves Ingrid made, and this he pulled out a rifle. Extra we have. You maybe need." Clara felt her throat tighten. I can't pay you for all this." "Not for paying," Ingrid said firmly. She looked past Clara to where Samuel stood. "You are the one who helps Mrs. Whitford?" Samuel nodded cautiously. "Good. Ingrid said she needs help. Tries to do too much alone." She fixed Clara with a stern look. "Like my Lars when we first come here. Too proud to ask for help. Nearly killed himself trying to clear fields alone," Ingrid Lars said gently. But his wife wasn't finished. "No, she should hear. We come to this country with nothing. People help us. Some call us squareheads, dumb Norwegians, but others see just people trying to make life like you." She looked at Samuel again. "Just men trying to make life." She reached into her apron and pulled out a small bundle. "Seeds," she explained. "From my garden plant in spring. You have good vegetables." Clara couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Samuel stepped forward and bowed slightly to the elderly couple. "Your kindness honors us," he said formally. "We will not forget." Lars nodded approvingly. "You'll come to our farm if trouble comes again. We old but not helpless. And we remember what it is to be strangers, to be hated for being different." After the Olsen left, Clara and Samuel carried the supplies inside in thoughtful silence. The visit had shown them that not everyone in the community shared the hatred they'd faced that morning. It was a small comfort, but in their isolated situation, small comforts mattered. "Good people," Samuel said as they put away the last of the supplies. "Yes," Clara agreed. "I had forgotten there were still some left." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The events of the day kept replaying in her mind. The torches, the threats, but also Samuel calling her by name. The trust in his eyes when she'd given him Jacob's gun. The unexpected kindness of the Olsen. She found herself at her window looking out at the barn, where Samuel's light still glowed. They'd crossed some invisible line today. She realized no longer just employer and worker, no longer just two people brought together by desperate circumstances. They were partners now united against a world that would tear them apart if given the chance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. She knew Morrison wouldn't give up easily, and men like the Harmon brothers would be looking for any excuse to cause trouble. But tonight, knowing Samuel stood watch, knowing they had at least some allies. Clara felt a fierce determination rise within her. They would not be driven out. They would not be broken apart. Whatever came next, they would face it, as they had faced today's threats together. The autumn evening was unseasonably warm, and Clara had suggested they eat supper outside under the old cottonwood tree. She had made a simple stew with vegetables from the garden that was finally thriving under their combined care. As they ate, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and for a moment, the world felt peaceful. "Tell me about your family," Clara said softly. "If you want to, I mean you don't have to." "It's good to speak of them," Samuel interrupted gently. Keeps them alive here." He touched his chest. He set down his bowl and gazed into the distance, gathering his thoughts. "My father, he was called Strong Elk Wararkeef." But he paused, searching for words. "Not war chief like white men think. He protect people, make sure children have food, elders have warm blankets, fierce in battle, yes, but gentle with family." Clara watched his face transform as he spoke, the harsh lines softening with memory. "My mother, singing river beautiful voice, could make cry grown warriors with her songs. She teach me plants for healing, how to read sky for weather, always laughing until his voice trailed off." The soldiers, Clara asked quietly. Samuel nodded. "They say we must move to agency land, leave graves of ancestors, leave sacred places. Father try to talk peace. He know we cannot win war against so many. But young men, they angry, want to fight. One night they attack wagon train." His hands clenched. "Not our band, but soldiers not care. They come at dawn." He was silent for a long moment, and Clara reached across the rough wooden table to touch his hand. He turned his palm up, interlacing their fingers. "I was hunting 2 days away. When I returned, he swallowed hard. Village burned, many dead. My parents, my sister, little fawn, only 14 summers gone." "Oh, Samuel." Clara breathed, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "I track soldiers for 3 days, crazy with grief, want revenge. But when I find them, I see they have children with them, families going to new fort, and I think if I kill, I become what they say I am, savage. So I turn away, but emptiness." He pressed his free hand to his chest, like piece of me cut out. They sat in silence as darkness gathered around them. Finally, Samuel spoke again, his voice stronger. "I drift for many seasons. Work for ranchers who not ask questions. Learn English better. Learn white man's ways. But always alone, always empty." Until he looked at Clara, until woman with fire in her eyes stands in dusty square and says, "I see man worth saving." Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I lost Jacob to fever," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 years ago this winter. He was sick only 3 days. I tried everything, every remedy I knew. Prayers, bargaining with God. Nothing worked. He died in our bed, holding my hand, telling me to be strong." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "After the funeral, everyone expected me to sell the ranch, go back east to my family. My sister wrote letter after letter, but I couldn't leave. This was our dream, Jacob's and mine. We were going to build something lasting here, have children to pass it on to. And then he was gone, and the dream seemed to die with him. But you stayed," Samuel observed. "I stayed too stubborn to quit. Maybe, or too afraid to admit failure. I watched the ranch fall apart piece by piece. Sold off land to pay taxes. Let the hired hands go when I couldn't pay them. Neighbors tried to help at first, but I was too proud to accept charity." She laughed bitterly. "Pride and a failing ranch were all I had left." "Not pride," Samuel said firmly. "Strength, courage, love for husband's memory. It didn't feel like strength. It felt like drowning slowly. And then Morrison started circling, making offers on the land, playing the concerned neighbor while calculating how to get my property for the lowest price." Her jaw tightened. "After that day in town, the day I brought you home, he showed his true colors." "Why you do it?" Samuel asked. "Risk so much for stranger." Clara considered the question. "When I saw you there in chains being sold like property, I thought about how helpless I felt watching Jacob die, how desperately I wanted the power to save him, and suddenly there was someone I could save. Does that make me selfish? Using you to heal my own wounds?" "No," Samuel said firmly. "Makes you human. We all carry wounds. Sometimes healing comes from helping others heal." The first stars were appearing overhead. Clara became aware that they were still holding hands across the table, but she didn't want to let go. "I dream of them," Samuel said suddenly. "My family. Sometimes good dreams, mother singing, father teaching me to track deer. Sometimes," he shuddered, Sometimes I see village burning, hear screams wake with their names on my lips. I dream of Jacob, Clara admitted. He's always just out of reach. I try to touch him, but he fades like morning mist. I wake up and for a moment forget he's gone. Then I remember, and it's like losing him all over again. Grief is like River Samuel said, sometimes quiet, sometimes raging, but always flowing. Cannot stop it. Can only learn to swim. They moved to sit on the porch steps, shoulders touching, still holding hands. The night sounds of the ranch surrounded them, crickets chirping, an owl calling in the distance, the horses shifting in their stalls. I never thought I'd feel anything again, Clara confessed. After Jacob died, it was like my heart turned to stone. I went through the motions of living, but I wasn't really alive, just existing. And now? Samuel asked softly. Clara turned to look at him, seeing his face illuminated by starlight. Now I wake up looking forward to morning coffee with you. I find myself humming while I work. The ranch feels alive again. I feel alive again. Samuel lifted their joined hands and pressed his lips gently to her knuckles. You save me, Clara. Not just from chains, from emptiness, from becoming nothing but ghost walking. You give me purpose again. We saved each other, Clara whispered. They sat in comfortable silence, each lost in thought. Finally, Samuel spoke again, sharing memories of his childhood learning to ride before he could properly walk. The ceremony when he received his adult name, the girl he'd hoped to marry before everything fell apart. Her name was Spotted Dove, he said. Gentle, always laughing. Died of white man sickness winter before soldiers came, maybe blessing she not see village burn. Clara squeezed his hand. I'm sorry. So much loss. Yes, but also this. He gestured to the ranch to her, to the life they were building together. From ashes, new growth. Not same as before, but still good. As the night grew cooler, they moved inside. Clara made tea, and they sat by the fire still talking. She told him about meeting Jacob at a church social, how he'd charmed her with his grand plans and gentle humor about their wedding day. When it rained so hard, the preacher had to shout the vows about the first night in their half-built house, with wind whistling through the gaps in the walls. Samuel shared more about his people's traditions, drawing parallels between their beliefs and the Christianity Clara had been raised with. Same creator, he said. Different names, different ceremonies, but same source. Reverend Blackwood would call that blasphemy, Clara said dryly. Reverend Blackwood sees only his own narrow path. Samuel replied, Cannot imagine creator big enough for all peoples. As the fire burned low, Clara yawned. I should go to bed. Tomorrow we need to check the north pasture fence. But neither of them moved. The thought of separating, of ending this moment of connection seemed impossible. Clara, Samuel said quietly. Today, sharing pain, sharing memory, this is sacred thing among my people. When two share such deep truth, they are bound not by ceremony or paper, but by something stronger. Clara's heart raced. What are you saying? I say only this. I am grateful for your trust, for your truth, for you. She stood then, and he rose with her. For a moment they stood close, her hand still in his. Then, gathering her courage, Clara rose on her tiptoes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. Good night, Samuel, she whispered. Good night, Clara. He replied, his voice rough with emotion. As Clara prepared for bed, she could still feel the warmth of his hand in hers, could still hear the pain and beauty in his voice as he'd shared his history outside her window. She saw his silhouette as he stood guard on the porch, protecting her as he did every night now. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. Morrison and his allies wouldn't give up. The town's prejudice wouldn't magically disappear. But tonight, two wounded souls had found comfort in shared truth, had begun to weave their separate griefs into something new and strong. In the barn room where Samuel would eventually retire, He pulled out a small leather pouch he'd kept hidden. Inside was an arrowhead, beautifully crafted from white stone. His mother had made it one of the last things she'd created before the soldiers came. Tomorrow, he decided he would give it to Clara among his people. Such a gift meant protection connection, and something more, something that translated poorly into English but meant everything in the language of the heart. The night settled deep around the ranch, and for the first time in many years, neither Clara nor Samuel felt alone with their ghosts. The smoke was visible from a mile away, a black column rising into the clear afternoon sky. Clara and Samuel had been mending the chicken coop when they saw it, and without a word they both started running toward the neighboring property. The Garrett farm lay to the east, home to Paul and Martha Garrett and their 3 young children. As Clara and Samuel crested the hill, they saw the source of the smoke. The Garrett's barn was fully engulfed in flames, and people were running frantically around the structure. "The children!" Martha Garrett's scream carried across the distance. "Emma's still in there. She was playing in the loft." Paul Garrett was being held back by 2 men as he fought to rush into the burning building. Clara recognized them as they drew closer. Tom Bradley and his father, Doc Bradley, along with several other townspeople who had seen the smoke. "You can't go in there, Paul," Doc Bradley shouted. "The whole thing's about to come down. My daughter's in there." Paul roared, struggling against their grip. Samuel didn't hesitate. Before anyone could stop him, he was running full speed toward the barn. Clara's heart leapt into her throat as she watched him disappear into the smoke-filled entrance. "No!" someone shouted. "That savage will shut your mouth!" Clara snarled, not even looking to see who'd spoken. Her eyes were fixed on the barn entrance, her whole body tense with fear. The seconds stretched like hours. The fire roared louder, and part of the roof began to sag ominously. Just when Clara thought she couldn't bear it another moment, Samuel emerged from the smoke. A small figure clutched in his arms, his shirt was singed. His face blackened with soot, but he was running carrying 6-year-old Emma Garrett to safety. Martha Garrett broke free from the crowd and ran to meet them, sobbing. Samuel gently transferred the coughing, frightened child to her mother's arms. "She breathes," he said simply. "Scared but not hurt bad." Doc Bradley immediately went to examine the child, while Martha clutched her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she kept repeating. "Oh God, thank you." Paul Garrett stood frozen, staring at Samuel with an expression of stunned disbelief. This was the same man who just a week ago had been part of the group calling for Samuel to be driven out of the valley. Paul's voice broke. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I was wrong about you. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Samuel nodded once, then turned his attention to the still-burning barn. "Animals?" he asked. "Got them all out," Tom Bradley said, speaking directly to Samuel for the first time, except maybe some chickens. More people were arriving now, forming a bucket brigade from the well to try to save what they could of the structure. Samuel joined the line without hesitation, and after a moment's pause, the townspeople made room for him. Clara joined too, passing buckets until her arms ached. It was a losing battle. The barn was too far gone, but they managed to keep the fire from spreading to the house. As the sun began to set, the barn finally collapsed in a shower of sparks and smoking timbers. The crowd stood watching, exhausted and covered in soot. Sheriff McKenna had arrived during the firefighting efforts. Now he approached Samuel, his expression unreadable. "That was a brave thing you did," he said gruffly. Samuel met his gaze steadily. Child needed help. Still, McKenna shifted uncomfortably. Not many men would have run into that inferno, white or otherwise. Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, who had been one of Clara's most vocal critics, stood nearby with several other women from town. She kept glancing at Samuel, her face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Finally, she stepped forward. "Mr. Tallbear." "Is it?" Her voice was stiff, formal, but not unkind. "What you did today, that was heroic." Samuel inclined his head slightly but said nothing. Little Emma Garrett recovered enough to speak, suddenly piped up from her mother's arms. "The nice man saved me. Mama, he came through the smoke like an angel." A ripple went through the crowd. Here was this child, innocent, without prejudice, calling the man they'd labeled a savage an angel. Martha Garrett set her daughter down and approached Samuel directly. Her dress was covered in soot, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes were clear and determined. "You saved my baby," she said. "I don't care what anyone says or what names they call you. You'll always be welcome at our table." She stood on her tiptoes and kissed Samuel's cheek, leaving a clean spot in the soot. The gesture was so unexpected, so public, that gasps arose from some of the watching women. "Martha, Mrs." Patterson exclaimed. Martha whirled on her. "Don't you Martha me, Prudence Patterson. This man risked his life for my child while others stood around talking. If that makes him a savage, then perhaps we need more savages and fewer civilized folk." Paul Garrett stepped forward, extending his hand to Samuel. "I owe you a debt I can never repay," he said. "But I'd like to start by apologizing for my behavior. I listened to fear and hate instead of judging you by your actions. I was wrong." Samuel looked at the extended hand for a moment, then clasped it firmly. "No debt," he said. "Neighbors help neighbors." "Yes," Paul agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "Neighbors." The crowd began to disperse slowly, but the atmosphere had changed where before there had been hostile stares and muttered curses when Samuel appeared. Now there were thoughtful looks, a few nods of acknowledgement, even a tentative smile or two. Reverend Blackwood, who had arrived late to the scene, tried to rally his supporters. "One act doesn't erase what he is," he said loudly. "The devil can appear as an angel of light to deceive." "Oh, shut up, Reverend," snapped Ingrid Olsen, who had arrived with her husband. "The only devil I see here is in hearts full of hate. This man saved a child." "What more proof do you need of his character?" Several people murmured agreement, and Blackwood found himself increasingly isolated in his condemnation. As Clara, Ara, and Samuel prepared to leave, Tom Bradley approached them. "Mrs. Whitford, Mr. Tall Bear, I wonder if I might speak with you." They paused, and the young man continued. "I've been thinking about what you said that day in town, Mrs. Whitford, about seeing a man worth saving. I see it now, and I'm ashamed it took something like this to open my eyes." He turned to Samuel. "I'd like to learn from you if you're willing about horses, about tracking, about seeing the world differently." Samuel studied the young man for a long moment, then nodded. "Come to ranch, we talk." As they walked home in the gathering darkness, Clara noticed Samuel favoring his left arm. "You're hurt," she said, concerned. "Small burn," he admitted. "Nothing bad. We'll tend to it when we get home," Clara said firmly. They walked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Clara spoke. "You changed things today, the way people look at you." "Maybe." Samuel said, "Some hearts change easy, some never change, but little girl is alive. This is what matters." Back at the ranch, Clara insisted on treating Samuel's burns. He sat at the kitchen table while she gently cleaned the affected areas and applied salve. Her hands were gentle but efficient, and Samuel found himself mesmerized by her care. "You could have died in there," Clara said quietly, not looking at his face. "You would go in for child," Samuel said. "I know this about you." "That's different." "No same heart, same courage." Clara's hand stilled on his arm. "When you ran into that barn, I've never been so frightened. Not even when Jacob was dying. The thought of losing you." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Samuel caught her hand in his, holding it gently. "I am here," he said simply, not going anywhere. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch, they could see lanterns moving in the distance. Neighbors helping the Garretts salvage what they could and beginning plans for a barn raising. "They'll rebuild," Clara said. "The community will come together. That's one good thing about frontier life. People help each other when disaster strikes. Today they see me help, Samuel said. Maybe tomorrow. They let me help build new barn. I think they will. Clara agreed. Paul Garrett's a proud man, but he's also fair. He'll make sure you're included. As if to confirm her words, they saw a rider approaching. It was Paul Garrett himself, tired and soot-stained but determined. Mrs. Whitford, Mr. Tallbear, he said, dismounting. I've come to ask for your help. We're planning a barn raising for Saturday. I'd be honored if you'd both come. And Mr. Tallbear, I'd particularly value your expertise with the heavy beams. Tom Bradley says you've done wonders with Mrs. Whitford's buildings. Samuel stood to face him. I will come help build strong barn. Paul smiled, the first genuine smile he'd ever directed at Samuel. Thank you, and spread the word, will you? We'll need all the hands we can get. After he left, Clara and Samuel sat in contemplative silence. The night was cool, autumn asserting itself, and Clara shivered slightly without thinking. Samuel draped his coat around her shoulders. Today changes things, he said quietly. But some still hate Morrison. Others must stay watchful. I know Clara agreed. But today showed that hearts can change. That's something, isn't it? Is everything, Samuel said. Hate is taught, but love is stronger. Spreads like fire, but builds instead of destroys. Clara looked at him in the moonlight. This man who had faced hatred with dignity, who had risked his life without hesitation for a child who'd been taught to fear him. Yes, she said softly. Love is stronger. They sat together as the night deepened, both aware that something fundamental had shifted, not just in how the community saw Samuel, but in what lay between them. The word love had been spoken, hanging in the air like a promise, a possibility, a hope for tomorrow. In the distance, a coyote howled, and its pack answered once. The sound might have seemed lonely to Clara. Now with Samuel beside her, it sounded like home. The barn, raising at the Garrett farm, drew nearly everyone in the valley. By sunrise, wagons were arriving loaded with lumber tools and food. Women set up tables under the shade trees, while men organized materials and discussed the best approach for the construction. Clara and Samuel arrived early, their wagon carrying tools and several pies Clara had baked the night before. As they pulled up, Clara noticed the momentary hush that fell over some of the gathered people, but it was followed by nods of acknowledgement and even a few welcoming waves. Paul Garrett strode over immediately, his hand extended to Samuel. Glad you're here, he said loudly enough for others to hear. We'll need your expertise on those main beams. The work began in earnest as the sun climbed higher. Samuel found himself at the center of the heavy lifting, his strength and knowledge of construction making him invaluable. Men who had previously crossed the street to avoid him now worked beside him, following his quiet directions for the safest way to raise the massive timbers. Steady now, Samuel called as they lifted a particularly heavy beam. Tom, shift left. Mr. Garrett, hold your end higher. His voice carried natural authority, and the men responded without question. Clara worked with the women, but she couldn't help watching the transformation taking place where once there had been suspicion and hostility. Now there was respect, grudging from some perhaps, but genuine from others. Around midday, when the sun was at its fiercest, Martha Garrett called everyone for the noon meal. Tables groaned under the weight of fried chicken, fresh bread, preserves, and pies. As people lined up to fill their plates, Clara noticed some of the men making space for Samuel, including him in their conversations about the work. That's a clever way to joint those beams, Doc Bradley was saying to Samuel. Where did you learn that technique? My people build lodges to last many seasons, Samuel replied. Must stand strong against winter storms. Summer heat, different materials, but same principles. Sheriff McKenna, who had been listening, nodded thoughtfully. Makes sense. Good knowledge to have. Clara felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. This was what she'd hoped for. Not just tolerance, but acceptance, even appreciation for what Samuel could contribute. The afternoon's work progressed smoothly, the barn's frame taking shape against the sky. Young Tom Bradley worked closely with Samuel, eager to learn, asking questions about everything from construction to horsemanship. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, the barn stood complete, lacking only the finishing touches that the Garretts would add over the coming weeks. The crowd gathered to admire their handiwork. Tired but satisfied, Paul Garrett climbed onto a makeshift platform of planks and cleared his throat. "Friends, neighbors," he began, his voice carrying across the gathering. "Today we've done something fine. We've rebuilt what was lost, and we've done it together." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "But I want to say something else," Paul continued. "A week ago I stood with those who wanted to drive out a man because he was different, because I was afraid of what I didn't understand. I was wrong." The crowd grew very quiet. Samuel Tallbear risked his life to save my daughter. He asked nothing in return. Today, he's worked harder than any 3 men to help rebuild what we'd lost. He's shown me what it means to be a true neighbor. Paul raised the cup of cider he was holding. "So I propose a toast to Samuel Tallbear, who saw a child in danger and didn't hesitate, who met hatred with dignity and fear with courage. Welcome to our community, friend. Hear, hear." The response was loud and from most sincere. Cups were raised throughout the gathering. Samuel stood frozen, clearly overwhelmed by this public acknowledgement. Clara moved to his side, her hand finding his. He squeezed it gently, drawing strength from her presence. "Speech," someone called out, and others took up the cry. Samuel looked at Clara, who nodded encouragingly. He stepped forward, his voice carrying the quiet dignity that had become familiar to her. "Thank you," he began simply. "Where I come from, we say barn raising is sacred act, not just building, creating shelter for life for growth. Today we build more than barn. We build understanding." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I know some still have doubts, have fear. This is natural. But I say this, I am here to work to help, to be good neighbor. My hand is open to all who will take it." He looked directly at several of the men who had been most hostile, including the Harmon brothers. "We are different, yes, but we share same sun, same rain, same hope for good harvest, same love for children, same need for community. These things make us same more than skin makes us different." The silence that followed was profound. Then old Lars Olsen began to clap his weathered hands, making sharp sounds in the still air. Others joined him until the applause was general, if not quite universal. Clara saw Jim Harmon lean over to whisper something to his brother Pete. Their faces were troubled, conflicted. Change, she realized, came hard to some. As the gathering began to break up, people loading wagons and preparing for the journey home, many stopped to speak with Samuel directly. Some offered tentative invitations to look at a horse with a troublesome leg, to advise on a building project, to join a hunting party. Mrs. Patterson approached Clara. Her usual stern expression softened. "I owe you an apology," she said stiffly. I judged hastily and spoke harshly. "Your Mr. Tallbear has proved himself a man of character." "Thank you," Prudence Clara said, choosing to be gracious. "That means a great deal." Mrs. Patterson hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "You'll both come to the church social next month, won't you? I think it would be good for everyone." Clara blinked in surprise. "The church socials were the heart of the community's social life. To be invited, both of them, was no small thing. We'll consider it," she said carefully as they loaded their wagon. Clara noticed Dale Morrison standing at the edge of the gathering, his face dark with displeasure. He'd arrived late and had not participated in the barn raising. Now he watched Samuel with calculating eyes. "Trouble," Samuel said quietly, following her gaze. "Yes," Clara agreed. "He won't give up easily. Today's success will only make him more determined. They were interrupted by little Emma Garrett running up to them, her mother hurrying behind. "Mr. Samuel," the child called. "I made this for you." She held out a small cloth doll, crudely stitched, but made with obvious care. "It's a guardian angel," she explained solemnly. "Like you were my angel to keep you safe." Samuel knelt to accept the gift, his face soft with emotion. "Thank you, little one. I will treasure this." Emma threw her arms around his neck in a quick hug, then ran back to her mother, who smiled tearfully at them both. As they drove home in the gathering dusk, Clara felt a deep contentment. The wagon rolled smoothly along the rutted road, and she found herself leaning slightly against Samuel's shoulder. "Today was good," Samuel said quietly. "Yes," Clara agreed. "Better than I dared hope." "You gave me this," Samuel said. "This chance, this acceptance started with you seeing man, not savage." "You earned it yourself," Clara protested. "With your courage, your hard work, your dignity in the face of hatred." "We earned together," Samuel said. "You and me partners." The word hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the practical partnership of running the ranch. As they crested the hill and saw their ranch spread below them, warm lights glowing in the windows of the house, Clara felt a surge of emotion. "Jacob would have liked you," she said suddenly. "He would have seen what I see." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "He was good man to win heart of woman like you." "I honor his memory." "I know you do," Clara said softly. "And I think he would want me to be happy again, to live, not just survive." They pulled up to the house as full darkness fell as Samuel helped Clara down from the wagon. His hands lingered on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met in the lamplight spilling from the house, and Clara saw in his face the same longing she felt in her heart. "Clara," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too. But tonight is for celebrating today's victory." Samuel finished. "Tomorrow will bring what it brings." Inside, Clara set about making a late supper while Samuel tended to the horses. When he came in, she had set the table with her best dishes, the one she hadn't used since Jacob died. "What's this?" Samuel asked, surprised. "A celebration," Clara said. "Today you became truly part of this community. That deserves marking." They ate by candlelight, talking about the day's events, planning for the ranch's future with new hope. The hostility they'd faced wasn't gone entirely, but it had cracked, letting in light. As Clara cleared the dishes, Samuel pulled out the small leather pouch he'd been carrying. "I have something," he said, suddenly shy. "Been waiting for right moment." He opened the pouch and drew out the white arrowhead, holding it out to her. "My mother made this. Is, how do you say, protective charm. Want you to have it." Clara took the arrowhead with trembling hands. She knew enough of native customs to understand the significance of such a gift. "Samuel, this is precious to you?" "Yes," he agreed simply. "As are you." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She closed her fingers around the arrowhead, feeling its smooth surface warm from his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll treasure it always." They stood facing each other in the soft candle light, the space between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Clara stepped forward, rose on her toes, and pressed a gentle kiss to his lips. It was brief, sweet a promise, more than a claiming. When she pulled back, Samuel's eyes were wide with wonder. "Clara," he breathed. "Good night, Samuel," she said softly, and fled to her room before her courage could fail her entirely. As she prepared for bed, Clara held the arrowhead up to the lamplight, admiring its delicate craftsmanship. Through her window, she could see Samuel standing on the porch, keeping his nightly vigil. But tonight she thought she saw him touch his fingers to his lips, as if holding the memory of her kiss. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Morrison wouldn't accept Samuel's growing acceptance quietly. There would be those who would never change their minds. But tonight Clara allowed herself to hope. She had bought a man's freedom in a dusty town square, seeing something others couldn't or wouldn't see. In return, she had gained so much more. A partner, a protector, a bridge between two worlds, and perhaps, if she dared to name it, love. The autumn wind whispered around the ranch house, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of change. Inside, two hearts that had known too much sorrow dared to dream of joy. And under the vast western sky, where anything seemed possible, those dreams didn't seem so impossible after all.